Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our Citrix on Microsoft Azure webinar today. So presenting the webinar we have Neil Collins from Citrix, who I will pass over to in 1 second.
Thank you, Amy, and good morning everyone. Can you see my screen okay, Amy?
Yes, perfect.
Yep, okay, great. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks for taking the time out to join the webinar today. As Amy mentioned, I work for Citrix. I'm a senior systems engineer. I'm based in the UK. I cover most of the UK and cover customers ranging from insurance sector to finance, so a broad range really. Previously I've worked in our professional services team and I've also worked for a couple of large enterprise organisations as an architect and also in operations. So this morning during the webinar I'm going to cover Citrix Cloud Services and Azure. The main focus is going to be on XenApp and XenDesktop service, and also going to look at workloads and considerations for deploying those workloads to Azure. Presentation will take approximately 30 minutes, and as Amy said, there'll be a Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask any questions as we move through. So the main topics I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, I just want to really just put a level set really on why Citrix Cloud Services. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just very briefly talking about why Citrix Cloud Services, why Citrix have cloud services. We'll then look at what Citrix Cloud Service is and isn't, more importantly isn't. There can be a little bit of confusion around this, so I just want to clarify that. And then the bulk of the time I'm going to spend talking about consideration for migrating workloads to Azure. And then at the end, I'll just talk briefly around the Citrix and Microsoft partnership. So I think it's worth just bearing in mind that the Citrix Cloud strategy is the same as the Citrix overall company strategy, and that's delivering technology services for secure delivery of apps and data. And that's I've been involved with Citrix technologies for nearly 15 years now, and that's been the message from Citrix over all that time, is the secure delivery of apps and data. I think one of the things that the cloud service enables us to do is to really accelerate and execute on that overall strategy, and it enables us to provide the end user, the admin, and the partner a unified user experience that hasn't really been possible before. And so just to dig a little bit deeper on that, some of the core principles and the overall strategy, and how we build out on that strategy. Mainly the products transitioning to cloud services, and Citrix have a cloud first mindset. So some new products will only be delivered as cloud services, and that will enable new types of services, new functionality that will only be possible because of the functionality and the features that we can leverage from cloud technologies. The important thing to bear in mind in here is that one of the areas that a cloud first model delivers is that the technologies aren't being deployed in silos and developed in silos. So we spent a lot of time over the last few years just developing a robust platform that underpins all of the services, and that means that we can deliver integrated services moving forward. And then, finally, the message from Citrix has been around any, and we recognise that customers are very much on a journey through this. So whether there's all in on cloud or whether there's hybrid, we recognise it's important that we support customers that are that can benefit from both on-prem deployments as well as cloud deployments, and support customers as they transition. So just looking at why Citrix built cloud services. I think one of the things was that over the last couple of years, it's important to recognise that customers have asked for, and customers that we're talking to are looking for organisations that have got a cloud-first strategy that can leverage hybrid cloud environments, enable the overcome IT constraints around time and money, and improve the speed of time to value, so that the time it takes to stand up and spin up a project and get value from that project and the investment that's made, and then also reduce the number or eliminate the number of upgrades, particularly major upgrades, moving forward. So it's important to recognise when Citrix Cloud Services first came about that there was some confusion around whether Citrix was going into a public cloud and going to start competing with the likes of Amazon and AWS, and we can say it's not a public cloud. We're not competing against Azure and AWS and Google. It's complementary in many ways, and really is Citrix as a service. So it's the Citrix management plane as a service and delivering that management as a service. And we can see that across a number of our technologies. So it's a cloud-based management and delivery platform for all of our workspace technologies, from XenApp and XenDesktop service to Xen Mobile, Share File, Smart Tools as well, Netscaler Gateway, and so it's tying into all of our product range right across those services, so that we can then deliver to private cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, and across multiple hypervisors. So it's really the unifying of the delivery of those Citrix services and that management experience. Just to give you an idea of some of the momentum that we're achieving here, so you can see that we've got new services that are coming on board rapidly, and that's one of the benefits of moving to a cloud model, that we can bring features and functionality into the services very quickly. We're achieving our goal of uptime. We've got multiple regions globally for different services. We're increasing the number of admins, and these numbers are increasing on a daily basis as well. So you can see there's quite a lot of momentum around the cloud services at the moment, and that's over the last year or so, and that's clearly going to accelerate and move forward. So what value does this bring? So Citrix operates the platform. We've got the integration services on the back end, connectivities included. Upgrades, importantly, are transparent and provide an evergreen service. And so you can see there are a number of different benefits with moving to this model. Delivers fewer servers for you to own and operate, and the maintenance and support is included. Okay, so that's just, as I say, just briefly just talking about kind of understanding where Citrix Cloud Service is and why Citrix have developed a cloud service. What I'm going to do now is just move into one of those services, which is the XenApp and XenDesktop service, which is probably the one that we're going to talk most around today, and where you typically put some of your workloads into Azure. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now just talking around the XenApp XenDesktop service. So one of the questions we often get is how can we deploy Citrix on Azure? And there are different ways in which you can do this. So for example, you could extend and you could have all of your management on-prem and potentially some of your workloads in your own data centers, and then move some workloads into Azure and connect back to your data center. And that's managed by your IT. You've got The apps and desktop workloads are both in a mixed environment, both on-prem and in Azure. One of the things you have to be careful on here is the latency between the VDAs, the workloads, and your management components, and ensure that that latency between those workloads is kept to a minimum. But yeah, you know, that's an option to extend workloads into Azure. The other option is to go all in and host all of your infrastructure in Azure. So you put your XenApp and XenDesktop management on Azure, and you take your own licenses and you set it up as though it was a private data center, and the workloads and the apps would be in Azure and would be managed. And then, as already mentioned, is the cloud service option, where you use the Citrix Cloud service for your management tier, and then you deploy your virtual apps and desktop workloads on Azure, and then you would manage your own workloads, your apps and desktops in Azure, and Citrix Operations would manage the management tier, the management plane of that infrastructure, of that deployment. So it's kind of three examples of how potentially you could move onto Azure. So just looking into a traditional deployment, just digging a little bit deeper into the XenApp and XenDesktop service. So a traditional deployment, you would have, in this example, you've got a XenApp XenDesktop 7.x environment where you've got your delivery controllers, which are the core of the service. You've got Studio and Director license server, your management components, and you've got SQL instance with a number of databases, monitoring and site database, and then you've got your VDAs, which sit on your hypervisor. You've also then plugged them into Active Directory. You're probably going to have Netscaler Gateway and also Storefront for your access layer. So that's a typical customer partner managed environment, and again, that could be all in on Azure, or that could be on-prem, and typically this would be seen as a site. So if you had a single data center, or you had a single logical data center, then that would be seen as a site. If you wanted to spring up a new data center, maybe in a different region or a different geo, then you would typically stand up another site. We do have the concept of zones, but again, one of the things you have to be mindful of is the latency and the management of those zones. So there are some considerations there around the management, the latency and scalability of your zones, but you could potentially stand up a zone, or you create separate sites globally. And typically what we see is organizations would set up multiple sites across geos. So you're replicating this environment into different areas. So with the XenApp and XenDesktop service, what we do there is we separate out the management plane, the top tier, so your delivery controllers, your database, and Studio and Director and license server come separate out into a management plane, and that's operated by Citrix. And then instead of sites, we now have the concept of a resource location. And so a resource location could be your data center, it could be Azure, and it could be in different regions. So different regions might have different resource locations. So for example, across EMEA, you might have a number of resource locations to put the VDAs closer to your user groups. And then globally, you might have resource locations spread across the globe. So Citrix would operate the top tier, the top layer, and then you would be responsible for operating and managing the on-prem components. The one thing we have here is the connector, and the connector, if you like, is a delivery controller proxy, and so the VDAs would talk directly to the connector. and the connector would then proxy those communications to the delivery controllers. And so you would install typically multiple connectors in each resource location for high availability, and then they would connect back to the XenApp, your instance of the XenApp and XenDesktop service. And as I say, each resource location would have a connector. The management and responsibility of the connector is that the customer or partner would manage the operating system down, and then Citrix manage the connector software and above, and that's kept as an evergreen service. The other point to mention on here as well is around the access layer. So the access layer could be within Citrix Cloud, or typically what we tend to find is that customers put the access layer, so storefront and NetScaler gateway, within the resource location. So one of the questions we get here is what is the cloud connector? So as I said before, it's really a proxy for the delivery controllers. So the VDAs would connect to the connector, and the connector then will pass that communication through to through the cloud service delivery controllers, and it bridges the gap between the cloud and the customer's resource locations. That means that there is less sensitivity for latency, so we can tolerate higher latency between those links. So if you have got connectors spread globally, then because of the architecture of the Citrix Cloud instances, then we can tolerate latencies between the resource locations and the cloud instance. Couple of points on there that it's not a VPN, it's egress, and the other thing as well to mention is it's self-updating and keeps evergreen, and so it's part of the service, and as I say, it's evergreened, it's updated on a regular basis. I think target is every 2 to 3 weeks there'll be an update, and some of those updates will be features and functionality, and other updates will be patching and security updates. So you can see that the connectors, as I say, is inbound messages are on WebSockets via the cloud service, and then outbound on standard HTTPS web requests. So then when we look at a hybrid cloud architecture, you can see here that we've got our XenApp and XenDesktop service with our key management components that are managed and operated by Citrix, and then you've got the connectors in your resource location, whether that's on Azure or whether that's in your data centers, and also on multiple hypervisors as well, and infrastructure options available there. So I'm just going to pause for a second and just quickly check the questions.
Hi Neil, can you see the questions?
Hi. I can, just about, yes. Yeah, I think there's one question, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, so it's from Richard. Citrix Cloud locations, are they in EU compliant zones, GDPR, etc.? So yes, so Citrix Cloud locations at the moment, there are two regions. There's an EU region and a US region, and there's soon to be an Asia Pac region. In terms of GDPR, then we have a PII statement document around GDPR, so that can be available. That can be made available to you. But yeah, it's, as I say, it's when you onboard and you set up your environment, you choose which region you want your environment to be based, whether it's EU or US. Another question has just come in: is the Cloud Connector deployed from Citrix Cloud only? Does it connect to Azure services? And just seeing the diagram. Okay, cool. Yes. So so the Cloud Connector is Citrix Cloud only, so it connects through to our instance Citrix Cloud. And just to clarify on that as well, that Citrix Cloud is built on Azure as well. So but it is essentially, it's operated as a service. Cool. Okay. Okay, so that's really kind of a little bit of a potted update on Citrix Cloud, and like I say, that I can follow up with more information on that moving forward. But just I didn't want to spend a great deal of time on that, but just wanted to give you a good overview of how Citrix Cloud operates within a XenApp and XenDesktop service. Bear in mind that this is one service that we're talking about here out of many services, and although the management is fairly similar, there are some differences. So this is specifically the XenApp and XenDesktop service. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just talk around, okay, how do we, so we've talked around different resource locations, we've talked around Citrix Cloud and what that means, and the XenApp and XenDesktop service. Then how do we move that forward? How do we move Citrix workloads into Azure? I mean, really what we're talking about here is application hosting and desktop hosting in Azure. So if you've got workloads that you want to move to Azure, how do you do that, and what are some of the considerations? So one of the things we have is an Azure Roadmap, and some of the key things that you need to consider when moving some of these workloads to Azure. And these kind of broken down into assess, connect, and then build. So the assess is really understanding your users, and also considerations around Azure performance. Connect is, starting that Azure relationship, and if you haven't already, or your organization doesn't already have an Azure subscription, then how do we set that up? And talk briefly around that, but I'm not going to spend a great deal of time there. And then the build, how do we create new VMs? So I think the first thing, if anybody's been in this sort of Citrix and EUC space for a number of years, then the user requirements are absolutely key, and that doesn't change. So, it's really important that we understand the user requirements. The next thing is to understand the performance benchmarks, and this does change a little bit because, previously when we're talking an on-prem environment, we would then look at how do we size the storage, how do we size the hosts, what considerations do we need to put into the hypervisor, optimizations for the hypervisor and the hosts and the storage, and that clearly changes, but there are some considerations in performance. And then how do we estimate our Azure cost? What's this going to cost? Because although we'd like it to be free, the idea that using public cloud is free is not the reality. So there is a cost to it, and there's definitely something that that needs to be considered. So again, pretty similar to probably many of you have done before, but understanding those user requirements. The good place to start is to really understand the user groups and the application workload and what the requirements of both of those are before you move forward into deploying them onto public cloud. It's really important to understand where the data sits, how the users access that data, and where the user groups will access their workloads from. Again, as before, we always find it easy, to target user groups with simple requirements first. That means that you can build out confidence in the solution, both from an operational point of view, but also from a user perspective. And then complex workloads can be gradually migrated to Azure over time. What I'm seeing is that some organizations are deciding to start with their 3D CAD applications, because we get the MV series workloads. So we can go with HDX 3D Pro and put those workloads into Azure, and absolutely we can, and some organizations are doing that. It's just taking a little bit longer because they're quite complex applications with quite complex requirements, so it just takes longer to make that a reality. So sometimes it's better to start with easier or simpler applications before you move forward. That means that you can, as I say, build up that confidence, build up that practice of deploying those workloads before you start with the complex ones. And then understanding, is it applications, is it desktops, is it applications and desktops that that you're going to be hosting in Azure. And then, just understands whether you're going to use a server OS, client OS, and what does that mean. The next thing to understand is the performance benchmarks, and we've done some testing with Login VSI to understand this, and documentation. There's a white paper on this which gives you more detail around this, the scalability. But some of the things we found is that a kind of summary from the document is that during the testing we found that the D2 V2 instance is the optimal VM for in terms of the amount of dollar per user per hour, and we found that you can get approximately 19 task workers on an instance and 15 knowledge workers. Again, these are guideline numbers and they will be different in your environment, I'm sure, maybe higher or lower, but it's a good place to start with an idea of the number of users per instance that you can get. If you look at, I've just got a snippet here from the document, but you can just see that the D2 V2 and the D3 V2 range is where we see the optimal areas and from a price point perspective. And when you look at it specifically just for price per user, then the D2 V2 is the lowest, and that's on compute. So yeah, you can see there that if your user groups would fit that type of workload, then that's that seems to be the optimum that we're seeing. One other thing to bear in mind here as well is Smart Scale. So Smart Scale is part of the Smart Tools set, which is another Citrix Cloud service, and that can help you automatically scale up and down, power on and off your environment. It's based at the moment on either a load-based, so as the load increases, more machines will be powered on, or as the load decreases, machines will be powered off, or it's time-based. So you can set peak and off-peak, weekends, etc. Moving forward, there's previews around using learning in here to understand the usage patterns and provide recommendations and automations around this as well, but that's something coming forward. So if we look at this in action here, so we've got a a catalog here with 20 VDAs in that catalog. And so what we're noticing here, and this is from a customer where our professional services were engaged, but what they noticed here was the actual usage pattern was lower than 20 VDAs. So they had 20 VDAs capacity. They wanted to make sure that they weren't going to run out of capacity. So they found that they were using approximately 9 to 10 most days. So it's well below their maximum capacity. So we then set Smart Scale to be configured with rules to ensure that a minimum of 11 VDAs during the working hours and 1 during non-working hours was powered on. And then if additional capacity is required, then because of the actual load increases, then it can then go up to a maximum of the 20 provisioned. So we can have we can go up to that maximum of 20 that's in the catalog. We can't go above the catalog number, but we can go up to that number. And then during off-peak, it might be slower, so we could choose smaller VMs, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And also, we need to make sure we configure policies for idle and disconnected timeouts. But what that means is essentially a cost saving of roughly about 73%. And again, this is something to consider when you're looking to move workloads. As a sizing example, if you say have 36 users, you might have say 2 D3 V2 instances with 18 sessions on each, or you could have 5 D2 V2 instances with 8 sessions on each, so you could spread them out across. And you can see in this example, it would be cheaper to use the 2 D3 V2 instances with 18 sessions each, which works out about $1.06 per hour. However, what happens when these users start logging off? So as the users start logging off, for example, now we've got 3 users on both. So if we've got 3 users, then potentially we could have both D3 V2 instances running. But it might be that we could have we could power off 2 of our D2 V2 instances. So then quite quickly the price point comes down as we move into those off-peak timings. And then clearly, if another user logged off, we've still got our 2 D3 V2 instances running, but we've now powered off 3 of our D2 V2 instances, and then the off-peak consumption reduces quite dramatically. So again, it's getting that balance between and understanding your workloads between peak and off-peak. So, as I say, striking a balance. So keeping the cost down, then using utilization-based rules, and also being understanding of your idle and disconnect timeouts, so that you've not got idle sessions or disconnected sessions hanging around, which will keep those machines powered on. Using the power on schedules, and then or you move towards a user experience centric where you've got larger VMs and they're always on. So again, it's a decision. It's striking a balance between the cost and the experience. The other thing to understand as well is around the storage. So within Azure, you've got standard and premium storage, and you've got unmanaged and managed disks. If we look at unmanaged disks, for example, then we've got unmanaged disk will put your disk across sort of from a standard storage account, so you have a maximum of roughly around about the scalability targets around about 20,000 IOPS, and those disks would be in the same storage account area, and you've got premium storage there as well, which is on SSD, so you get higher IOPS. And yeah, as I said, they're located on the same storage unit, so that presents a little bit of a potential issue there, where if there is an outage on that storage unit, then potentially you could lose a high percentage of the environment. On managed disks, that simplifies the storage. So again, you've got standard and premium on there, and so these are managed, and it reduces the overhead from a Citrix management point of view, and also increases the time when you use managed disks. And managed disks are now supported by Citrix. If I just show you a quick example here, so this is some timings, performance and costs. So you can see that the overall performance is fairly close, but things like updating the image operation a lot quicker, creating the catalog is quicker, and this is on 1,000 pooled VMs, but the cost is a little bit higher. So again, it's understanding the cost performance benefits. So it's understanding the estimating those costs, the network and storage resources, with compute being the largest expense. Use power management and smart scale to control those workloads, and then we have an Azure cost calculator that you can use online, and that will go through and help you. I've got a slide on that just coming up in a second, but that will go through and help you do some estimates on your particular environment and your requirements. Hybrid use benefits are supported as well, and when you go through the provisioning from an MCS point of view, you get the option to choose the license type, so you can use hybrid use benefits, which can bring your cost down. So if you've got an enterprise agreement, then you can use that hub. Here's an example of the cost calculator, so you can run through some scenarios from your environment and just see what the costs, what the estimated cost would be. So just on the Azure instances there, just understanding the user workflow, the application requirements, the instance types, and the instance prices. As we say, start with smaller, cheaper instances and scale up as the project progresses, and that's clearly one of the benefits of using Azure, is that you can scale up as you move forward. Okay, so just talking about our connection, just very briefly going to talk around this, but if you've got your Azure subscription, then within that you have your resources that exist within your subscription, and the subscriptions are associated to the accounts. So you can have different subscriptions per account, and then you've got the billing down onto a subscription level. One of the consideration is that the subscriptions have limits on available resources. So just understanding again those limits, but those can be raised. But it's understanding what your organization has for your Azure subscription limits, and then making sure that you understand those, so that when you start deploying, you're aware of those limits. So considerations, hierarchy and governance of your subscription, the limits you've got there. Are they going to be shared across systems or dedicated, and your cross-subscription networking. So just review those limits when you're designing, so you can determine the numbers you require. So connecting the data center, essentially two options there. You've got VPN or ExpressRoute. So VPN really for small deployments, ExpressRoute we see for larger scale deployments. Obviously it takes a little bit longer to get the ExpressRoute in. And then again, it's being aware of the Azure pricing and understanding your workload. So are you carrying a lot of data from your applications, across your express route, which is going to carry a cost. So yeah, understanding total bandwidth required, outbound data versus inbound data, and then VPN versus express route, and looking at the network proximity and latency. So again, just looking at some considerations around our Azure building blocks and then deploying our Citrix workloads. One of the things that we see is, have a well-defined naming scheme before you start. It's very easy to kick things off and start building things, but then it's difficult to change it later. So make sure you have that before you start, and then start with your topology. And one of the key things in here, we talked a little bit about some of these, but one of the key ones there we haven't mentioned yet is the availability sets. So making sure that you separate your machines into availability sets so that machines of that type won't be impacted by any maintenance outages. An example of availability set without Citrix Cloud, you might have these availability sets. So it means that at least one virtual machine will be available during a maintenance event, and then they need to be added to the availability set at creation, and then create one for each system tier. When we add in Citrix Cloud, clearly that reduces the number of availability sets. So we would then put the cloud connected VMs rather than the DDCs in an availability set. And we definitely want multiple cloud connectors. As I said, they are updated, and not always, but sometimes when they're updated, that requires a reboot, and so they will reboot. So we need to make sure we've got multiple of them, 2 or 3, but make sure they're sat in an availability set so that if there is a maintenance outage, then you're not going to lose all of your cloud connectors. So the ARM MCS service automates the creation of the Azure resources. So it uses the REST APIs to automate the machine provisioning processes. So MCS is machine creation services, is a Citrix technology. So automates the creation of resource groups, virtual machines, and storage accounts. One of the requirements for that is to make sure you've got a Azure Active Directory service principles required for that. We've talked a little bit about the storage and the hub. So each machine catalog. So you have a machine catalog, and that's associated with an Azure resource group, and then there's a resource group limit of 800 machines. And if you're using unmanaged storage, then there's some considerations around the number of machines per storage account, and we do have a formula that can help you work out how many resource groups would be created in that case. So if we then look this down, we break this down into in this case here, we've got our resource groups. We're not using Citrix Cloud, but if you can imagine, you've got, instead of delivery controllers, we've got our connector servers in there. They would be our infrastructure resource group, and then our VDI and our XenApp resource groups. And again, just coming back to the hybrid cloud architecture, so you can see again from a high level how this would connect in a hybrid environment. So really, I know that I've kind of gone through fairly quickly there, but just to give you an idea of some of the considerations and some of the key steps with getting started, and making sure we assess our application, our user requirements. That's still key, and that's always been one of the things that's been very important in an EUC project. Understanding and assessing the performance and how we can make best use of that performance and the cost models, our connections, and then and some of the considerations around building out in Azure. I'm just going to pause there for a second and just have a quick look at the questions and see. Let's have a look. Yeah, there will be a copy of the presentation will be available. Can we run CAD or BIM applications? So yes, you can. So you've got the NV series VMs in Azure. There are some specific considerations around that, but yes, it can be done. And we have a number of customers that are in the process trialing CAD applications from Azure. Yes, it's certainly something that can be done, and with the HDX 3D Pro technology from Citrix, then that does enable that. I know it'd be smart scale. Yusuf, sorry, there's a little bit of, I know what you mean from the there's a little bit of confusion on that slide, but yes, it would be you'd use smart scale to manage those VMs. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time, so just very quickly on Citrix and Microsoft. So 25-year partnership, 230,000 joint customers, tens of million users that sort of rely on the Citrix Microsoft solution. You know, there's a lot of integration within Microsoft operating systems. You know, we're often zero-day support for new operating systems and first support for example, for Server 2016. We work very closely with Microsoft on a number of areas. As I say, for the past 25 years. Citrix Cloud is built on Azure, and we're doing a lot of integration within our MCS, our deployment mechanisms, and Azure, and integration with Windows 10. We've got Skype for Business optimization pack and integration with, so we work very closely with the Skype for Business development teams. EMS is again something that we've got integration with, and also support and integration with Office 365. So there's a close working relationship with Citrix and Microsoft, and that moves forward into their Azure environment. So that's the end of the presentation. I know that I've kind of gone through some of those concepts very quickly, and I've overrun a little bit. Apologies for that. But I think it's important just to raise some awareness around some of the things you need to consider when deploying workloads into Azure. We're seeing a number of customers doing this now, particularly in a hybrid environment. We're utilizing Citrix Cloud with the connectors to deploy those environments and manage those hybrid environments.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Neil. So if anyone does have any more questions, there is a questions box just at the right-hand side of your screen. And then obviously, if you'd like to submit any questions outside of the webinar, there is the email address for our virtualization team here at Bytes. It's vteam@bytes.co.uk. So feel free to submit any via email that way as well. Okay, so let's wait a couple more minutes to see if any more questions come through.
So I've just seen this question from Stephen. We didn't actually cover that, Stephen. So the question was, can you use the on-premise licensing server? So depending on which environment you choose. So if you go with Citrix Cloud, then you would use the licenses would exist within the Citrix Cloud service. There are hybrid rights that allow you to transition from on-prem to Citrix Cloud over a period of time. But if you're all in with Citrix Cloud, then you would use the Citrix Cloud license server and capability there. If you're keeping your management plane on premises, then clearly you do use the license server on premises. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So it looks like that's all the questions for today. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining the webinar. I hope you found it useful, and thank you, Neil, also for presenting today. So as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is a really short feedback form at the end. So if you would like any further information, just pop that in there and we will be in touch soon. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hope it was useful. Thanks. Bye.